Hello and welcome to Canary Live Berkeley. How are you doing tonight? I'm your host, Julian Spector. First, we got to thank this band. This is the Gomper Drums Live. How do you think they did? Okay, yeah, we have Chris Gomper on the drums, Frank Martin on piano, Gary Brown on the bass, and Lincoln Adler on saxophone. What a way to start the night. Thanks so much for being here, guys. Okay, hey, Berkeley, how's it going? How are you doing today? Yeah? You know, this is sort of special for me. I used to live here. When I was a young clean tech reporter, I was an East Bay resident just down in Oakland, and it feels like coming home. Do we have any Oakland people in the house today? Yeah? Okay. Berkeley, hometown crowd, anyone? Yeah? Any San Franciscans? Anybody? You know, you did such a brave thing just crossing a body of water to be here tonight, and obviously worked harder than any of us to be present, and we really appreciate that. Unless anyone came from Marin? Do we have any Marin? Yeah? Oh! Okay. Sorry, San Franciscans. You're not as special. Santa Rosa, we got some wine country in the house? Okay. Silicon Valley? Anyone? Yeah? All right. Cool. Well, yeah, it's great to be back in Berkeley. I kind of moved off to LA a few years ago, and it's true what they say about the people and the weather being nicer, but you can't rock a chunky sweater in a dry heat. It's just not as good, and it's good to be back in the Bay for your fog, the occasional clamminess. It makes it nice to gather inside in a warm room with lots of people. So our goal here tonight with Canary Media, we're a nonprofit news company. We cover the transition to clean energy, and we do that virtually. We're online. We're a remote company, but there's just something so special about bringing people together under one roof. People who are dedicating their lives and their careers to working on the climate challenge, working on making clean energy a massive force in society. And so we're just so pleased to be here with you. We're filling the house. Thank you all for coming. We hope you make some friends, find some future collaborators, maybe, just talk to anybody. Anybody here you should talk to. Don't hold back from that. So, we've got a great show for you tonight. We're coming to you hot off an election day. We're in race after race across the country. Clean energy was actually kind of on the ballot. Everyone, activists, advocates been telling me for years, hey, clean energy is going to be on the ballot this time. And this time, actually, it was. Georgia, there's a prominent, election of public utility regulators. We had New Jersey governor's race. Energy affordability was front and center in that. And so it does feel like we're coming together at a moment when the energy issues that many of you here have focused on for years and nerded out about and told people really matter and are important. There's some broader recognition happening in a way that I don't think it always was. So just to give you a little sense of where we're going tonight, we're going to start. I'm going to interview Mark Toney, who's one of the top advocates for affordable energy, fighting to keep electricity affordable for people here in California. We've got David Hochschild from the California Energy Commission, one of the top state leaders making the clean energy happen here in California. And then we're going to have some more networking and then get to a live recording of the fantastic Dave Roberts Volt podcast. Yeah, and that's with Kim May Cutler getting into clean tech investing and housing and the YIMBY movement, the rise of that in the Bay Area here. So stick around. It's all going to be fantastic. I was thinking about, in the old days, I always used to wonder why folks on stage at events would thank their sponsors. And now I'm at an event that has sponsors, and it's just such a good idea, actually. My views somehow totally changed on that. So we are here with grateful, we're grateful for the support of Hydrostor, an energy storage company, Marin Clean Energy, the one of the driving forces of the local community energy movement here in California, and Lunar Energy. Yeah, thank you to all of them. Thank you to all of you for being here. And I think with that, we're going to kick it off with the first interview. Let's bring out Mark Toney from the Utility Reform Network. Okay, we got that. Does that sound good? Is that Not too many contortions to speak into that mic. Try yours. How are you doing? How are you doing, Mark?
I am doing just fine.
Okay, yeah, you can hear him?
Julian.
We all sound good? All right.
All right.
Yeah, and I should mention it's not just the people in the room here. We also are streaming live with this service called Alert the Globe. So that's what that sort of floating orb there in the middle is. So we've got people here, we've got people all over the world. But we're here with Mark tonight because he is the leader of the Utility Reform Network. And for those of you who don't know, that's one of the top group out there fighting at the state level for affordable energy when the utilities want to raise the rates. Folks like Mark get in there and muster a bunch of arguments to try to keep energy affordable and readily available for people. So I wanted to start it off just sort of setting the scene now. It seems like there's a lot that you could be worried about as far as being able to afford energy. We've got, rates are increasing nationwide. It's been about 5 or 6% increase from August this year since August last year. We have a president who's doing whatever he can to block cheap renewable energy projects from getting built, which would produce cheap energy, actually, if they were allowed to happen. We got the looming AI menace, that's sucking up all sorts of energy. And I guess I'm wondering, in your years fighting for ratepayers and consumers, is this like the scariest time you've encountered? I'm really fun at parties, by the way.
Julian, I really appreciate being invited by Canary Media to be part of this conversation. TURN fights for the cleanest energy at the lowest prices. I like to say we want the most green for the least green. And this is important because affordability and clean energy need to go hand in hand. We have to resist the people who want to split them apart and say, you either have to choose affordable or you have to choose clean and expensive or affordable and dirty. And at TURN, we reject that. We fight for clean and affordable together. These are absolutely some of the most trying times that many of us have seen in our lifetimes when it comes to all the attacks on clean energy policy, when it comes to utility bills just skyrocketing. And yet there is and are many glimmers of hope. Certainly the elections this Tuesday for many of us was very encouraging. The legislature in California this past session, we were able to get several major affordability bills passed that save ratepayers billions of dollars and will be long-term savings, not just short-term, but over 10, 20 years. So, but don't get me wrong, so much more needs to be done. But I think the experience we see is that when people are clear on the messaging, when they're clear on working together, we can actually make a difference.
That's great. Okay, well, let's there's a lot. This is great. I want to follow up on a bunch of that. Let's start with the elections. I think one of the maybe most surprising things from Tuesday was Georgia. So Public Service Commission, there were 2 seats where Democrats ran and unseated Republican incumbents, and this hasn't happened in Georgia for literally decades. And so they're now on the body that regulates the big monopoly utility, Georgia Power, which has been asking for billions of dollars of new, permission to build new power plants for the AI era and kind of charge the ratepayers for that. So this election was explicitly about, should we let utilities kind of get whatever they want? And it's starting to, is it seeming like that's actually bad politics?
Here's what I look at from this. 2 things. One is that voters are sending a message that you can't keep rates going up and up. You can't keep shareholder profits going up and up. But also, there is huge concern about the energy and water consumption of data centers. And what is the value of data centers? And I think a questioning of what is the value of AI. And a lot of people, besides the fact that there seem to be these big tech companies who believe that they are going to create trillions of dollars of returns for themselves, a lot of people are stepping back and saying, we're not quite sure.
Gotcha. And then I guess in terms of the broader question of how to argue to the public, how to make a case to the public about strong utility regulation and pushing back on that, are there any lessons from this week that you would extrapolate to other states?
One of the things that we saw is in governor race in New Jersey, affordability, and not just affordability, utility affordability was one of the absolute top issues. And you may have seen that the governor-elect has already put out a state of emergency statement. And what's impressive is she says, I will stand up for customers, for ratepayers. I will stand up against anybody, including members of my own party. And the reason that's important is affordability is not a partisan issue. Okay? Affordability is an issue that is important across the political spectrum. And one of the things that I have done at TURN is to build a big tent of support for affordability. So in our big tent, we have large industrial users, steel mills, glass smelters. We have large farmers, agriculture. We have small businesses. We have we can't just make this. And the other thing I want to point out is it's important to speak to people across the political spectrum. I spend a lot of time getting interviewed on iHeart Radio Network 4 times this year because they keep calling me back. It's important. The pathway to winning is to take, in my view, progressive policies and to package them as universally good for society.
I'm curious about that because, I mean, we all know, like, clean tech experts often don't talk in ways that are like broadly intelligible to everybody else, and that kind of keeps me in a job because then we get to try to explain it in language that everybody might understand. So don't change. But do you have any tips or advice for folks on like how do you take a concept that resonates with the clean energy experts, but like put it in different words for an iHeartRadio audience?
It's so important to take complex issues and sometimes you use examples that people understand. So when I'm talking about financing, okay, one of the ways that we can really save money is to change the way that we finance capital investments for utilities, transmission lines, things like that, how we move the electricity. And to explain to people, gosh, if you are buying a house, you're probably financing it over 30 years or something like that. And one mortgage company says, I'll give it to you at 5% interest over 30 years. And another mortgage company says, I'll give it to you for 11% for 30 years. You don't have to think too long and hard which is a better deal. And this is the difference between corporate financing and public financing. So that's the way I explain the difference and say part of our strategy of bringing the bills down for ratepayers is to basically cut out the profits from shareholders. And we do that through public financing. We do it through ratepayer financing. There's a fancy term people like to use called securitization. I hate to use that word because nobody knows what that means,
And
but to
the
say
clean tech
ratepayer
experts love
financing.
that securitization. That's what
Yeah,
I've
but
heard a lot of stories about
so
that.
yeah, so just breaking things down, giving examples that people can understand. Like, we need to take away the credit card that utilities have that have no spending limit and a guarantee somebody else is going to pay the balance. That's much easier for people to understand than to talk about memorandum accounts and balancing accounts.
No, very good point. Well, and so that public financing, securitization, that's actually happening in California now after the latest legislative session. So tell us about like what happened this summer. A lot of energy affordability was the talk of the town in Sacramento, and some things actually emerged from it.
TURN fought very hard to bring this big tent together to support a series of policies that ended up in Senate Bill 254 that included $6 billion of ratepayer financed wildfire safety investments. That's going to save $3 billion over the next 10 years for ratepayers.
3 billion.
And also to set up a new structure for public financing. That'll take a little bit longer to get off the ground. And these are first important steps. So much more needs to be done. But it's still encouraging that we got as much done as we did. And, we welcome your involvement. We welcome your support. Turn.org is a way to sign up and find out what's going on, at least from our point of view.
And so that was basically the utilities used to sort of provide their own financing for these big grid projects, and then that would charge the higher rate, like the 11% mortgage rate you were talking about, and then this is setting up state level financing as an alternative and compelling the utilities to use the cheaper money. Is that?
In some cases, in the provision that said the next $6 billion of financing for, hardening the wires, either insulating the overhead power lines or burying them underground, that has to be done through ratepayer financing. By the way, ratepayer financing is about 4%. Oh. It's hard to get lower than 4%. Why? Because ratepayer financing has no risk. Captive ratepayers can't go nowhere, okay? There's nowhere else to go. So it is considered by the Wall Street investment community to be very low risk, so the interest rate is low.
And how did you, if this is essentially biting into profits the for-profit utilities could have pocketed otherwise, how did they push back? How did you deal with that kind of conflict in the process to getting it passed?
The utilities hated this idea. They fought it tooth and nail. However, there was something they wanted this year. And this session, they wanted to expand the wildfire insurance fund. And so we basically said a couple of things. One is, you know how hard it is for a group like TURN to stand up in front of people and say, we support ratepayers contributing $9 billion more to this wildfire fund? Okay, that's not an easy thing to say. So what I told them is, A, shareholders have to contribute and match dollar for dollar, one. Two, we have to bundle and package any increase with affordability for ratepayers so they can see their bills actually going down they can see a difference.
Gotcha. Okay, so kind of grand bargain in the way old legislation used to get done. Everybody wants something, and you make something happen with that. Now there was another set of bills this summer that were focused on the virtual power plant concept of maybe we could save money by leveraging all the batteries that are already in people's houses. I believe 3 of those passed with big majorities, and then Governor Newsom actually vetoed them, sort of surprisingly. Curious, what's your view on kind of how we should be trying to leverage clean energy devices that are already in people's homes and, using those to lower the cost of serving the grid at large?
I think there's tremendous potential and promise in virtual power plants. It is not an issue that TURN has a lot of expertise on. We certainly could not explain to you why it got vetoed. That wasn't our field.
You didn't do that.
But, no, we didn't veto it. We didn't ask for a veto. I got to be clear here. But we have been in conversations with a lot of our partners who do support virtual power plants so that we can learn more and we can be more part of that conversation this year. We were so focused on affordability that we weren't able to address everything, quite frankly.
Yeah, but and so that's good to know. But overall, was this, among the more productive sessions you've had on this issue in recent memory? Like, have there been other years where you passed as consequent, billions of dollars of savings?
I will tell you this. TURN has been talking about an affordability crisis for at least the past 6 or 7 years. It is only this year that the legislature discovered affordability as a big issue. I can't tell you how many legislative meetings and retreats I've been to where everyone is saying affordability, particularly utility bills, is the number one issue I'm getting calls on. More than homelessness, more than crime. It's utility bills. Now, I will say that I've been working very hard for a very long time, telling people over and over, call your senator, call your assembly member. Every time your bill comes, call them. Don't just call them once. Call them once a month, and that has been part of my messaging, and maybe it's working a little bit.
Yeah. No, there's good. And that's a good, easy monthly reminder. You get that bill, you're like, time to call my friendly representative again.
And call the governor too. Okay, the governor also needs to hear this. Okay, they're all part of the solution here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a nice way of putting it. Part of the solution. And but that's interesting. I think that it has been this long, sort of slow grind getting this to rise to prominence and salience, and now it's breaking through in California. Seems to be breaking through in New Jersey based on Tuesday's results. Georgia. I guess maybe to wrap up here, like what's your theory of the future and kind of the way that affordability will play in broader politics? Is this going to be a top issue in the midterms? Where do you see it all going from here?
I think a lot of people in California are looking very carefully at the clean energy and the affordability of public power agencies versus investor-owned utilities. And I think that the more that the gap increases, the more customers of investor-owned utilities are going to start saying, well, how come? What can we do to keep our utility companies in the same league as the public power agencies? And I think that's a fair question. I think it's a fair question that customers, we're all captive customers here, whether we are with PG&E or with SMUD, okay? But we have to ask ourselves the question, what model works? How can we have some control over profits? How can we have reasonable profits but not unreasonable? And when we're looking at rate increases, every time the utilities come before the Public Utilities Commission, what we've been saying is don't just look at their sky-high request. Make them come in with a request that's at inflation. A starting point makes a big difference. Starting from 20% increase and working down, that's hard for TURN. It's much easier if the utilities have to start at inflation and justify every dollar over. Those are some of the structural things that will make a difference.
Wow. Well, I think that's all the time we have for this session. But let's hear it for Mark. And that was great. Fighting on some very complicated issues, but with a smile and with some humor, and really appreciate you being here. And then actually you gave us sort of a segue, because our next segment is a video from Marin Clean Energy, which is one of these local kind of community, not the Wall Street owned type of power providers. So let's roll that, and Mark and I will head off stage here.
Good evening to everyone at Canary Live and to California's clean energy champions. I'm Dawn Wise, founding CEO of MCE, California's first community choice energy provider. This year marks MCE's 15th anniversary. What started in 2010 with serving just a few thousand customers has grown into a movement. 25 community choice energy providers now serve 1/3 of Californians. As a not-for-profit public agency, we've invested $4.5 billion into new renewables and reinvested $400 million back into our communities across Contra Costa, Marin, Napa, and Solano counties. Just 10 miles from here, in Richmond, we partnered with Richmond Build to install 10.5 megawatts of solar on a reclaimed brownfield. Local graduates helped build it, gaining skills, jobs, and pride in being part of the green energy transition. We've come a long way since launching with just me and an intern to serving over 1.5 million residents and businesses in the Bay Area. Thank you to everyone at Canary Media for the opportunity to tell our story, and to all of you for being part of this journey. Together, we're proving that community-driven solutions can power a cleaner, fairer future. So cheers to a great evening ahead. And by the way, I'm here in the audience with a few other MCE team members, so please swing by and say hello.
All right, yeah, great little message from Marin Clean Energy. They've been at it for 15 years. I did not realize that, but now it's kind of this trend that's taken over in California. But now we are going to welcome Curt Hildebrand from Hydrostor. This is a very unusual grid, like big scale grid storage company. They're not inventing batteries or something. They're digging into the ground and making this sort of mechanical storage on a massive scale to help with California's energy transition. So let's hear it for Curt, and he'll tell you a little about what's going on.
How's everybody doing tonight? All right. Again, my name's Curt Hildebrand. Test. There we go. You need a long duration battery in this thing. Hydrostor, we're pleased to be sponsors for the event tonight. And for folks that don't know much about Hydrostor, we're not exactly a household name just yet. But we do provide long duration energy solutions to the grid. Next slide, please. We do view ourselves as a technology company, and those energy solutions come in the form, again, of long duration. For folks that don't speak fluent storage vernacular, we deem 2 to 4 hour storage resources as short term. Anything longer than that is typically deemed long term. We focus on 8 hours and above with our technology. In our technology, we call it advanced compressed air energy storage. What we've done is really taken the best attributes of traditional compressed air energy storage, but improved upon that. Over the last 10 plus years, we've been busy developing this technology, testing it, refining it, tweaking it, and we've really reached a place now where it is ready for prime time and utility scale development. Right here in California and across the globe, we'll talk about some of the projects we're actively developing. But again, one of the big attributes that we designed out of traditional compressed air energy storage. When you expand a gas rapidly, it gets very cold. It tends to freeze into solid chunks. That doesn't get along too well with high-speed rotating equipment. So when you expand that air, typically you have to utilize natural gas or another heat source to reheat that air to allow that air to expand and generate electricity. What we've done is we've perfected a system where we extract the waste heat during the compression process when we store the compressed air, and we store it, and then we reuse it during the expansion process. It's a fairly simple system. We use air, water, and gravity. I encourage folks, if you're interested, to go on our website. Don't have the bandwidth tonight to explain it in great detail, but we do also have a number of colleagues here. If you could raise your hands if you have questions, please feel free to contact any of the Hydrostor crew here tonight. Next slide. How many folks here have seen the duck curve? Quack, quack. Basically, this is a famous or infamous Cal ISO net load curve that gets updated annually as we add more and more renewable intermittent resources. We're now over 50% renewables on the grid in California. Congratulations. I know a lot of folks in this room played a role in that. And we have added a tremendous amount of storage to the system as well. But again, 90+% of that storage is typically in the form of lithium-ion batteries. Nothing against those batteries. I got one on my phone. Everybody does. But they do have some drawbacks. They degrade, and they need replacement fairly frequently. We do also, as a large grid, do benefit from technological diversity, and that's where our advanced compressed air energy storage does come into play. Again, for folks that aren't acquainted with the duck curve, as we add more renewables, typically solar these days, that net load when the sun's up comes down, and we have a bit of a challenging environment for the Cal ISO to operate the grid. That duck keeps getting fatter every year as we add more solar, and the solution to that, again, is adding storage to the grid. That way we can capture that energy off-peak or when it's in excess of load, store it and utilize it on peak. Next slide. The Willow Rock Energy Storage Center is our flagship project located right here in California, down in Kern County. We're quite proud of the progress we're making on this facility. It is a 500 megawatt by 8-hour project, 4,000 megawatt hours. It is one of the largest energy storage projects being developed in North America currently. We are well on our way to reaching a final decision from the California Energy Commission. We are expecting our proposed decision any day now, so keep an eye out for that. We certainly are. We're very proud to have received the unanimous support from our host county supervisors, the Kern County Board of Supervisors for the project, and we've also reached agreement with Curt on a project labor agreement. The project is tremendously supported within Kern County. They're a fabulous host for us, and we expect to be breaking ground on that project in Q2 of next year. It is a very extensive construction cycle in excess of $1.5 billion of investment, and we expect to be operational in 2030. Next slide. Along with the electrical benefits of the project, we are quite proud of a lot of the environmental and community benefits that we've been able to put together throughout the development. For scale, the project can power the entire city of Bakersfield for 8 hours. The footprint of the project is very modest, under 100 acres, so much smaller than pumped hydro or some of the other alternatives. And we do use a fraction of both the land and water of pumped hydro. Next slide. The economic benefits that also accrue from the project, we expect to employ in excess of 6,000 people over the 5-year construction cycle for the project, with a peak workforce in excess of 700 people and 40 full-time jobs when we do go operational. Next slide. We've been working very closely with our host communities since we first embarked on this project. We have made them aware of the impacts, both beneficial and otherwise. They have embraced us quite fondly, given that this is a very significant investment. We do not have any greenhouse gas emissions from our operations. The investment will be again in excess of $1.5 billion. We do have a Department of Energy loan guarantee currently in place for $1.76 billion in support of the construction. And some of the local benefits, we expect over $500 million in regional benefits over the 50-year commercial lifespan of the project, significant property taxes, and we've also spent a lot of time meeting and understanding our host community's needs and desires. So we've worked to partner with a lot of nonprofits and other community groups. Safe Haven is a wonderful example. I encourage folks to look them up. They are a fantastic charity doing great work in Kern County. Next slide. And with that, I appreciate your attention and look forward to providing future updates as we reach final decision from the Energy Commission and hopefully move into construction early next year. Thank you.
All right. Well, that's a very exciting one. There's a lot of new storage technologies, but people actually ready to break ground is kind of a different and rare thing. So thanks to him for that. And next, we're bringing up one of our probably easily the most prolific Canary Media writer. I don't know how he sleeps and eats in between filing all the words and stories that he manages to do. Jeff St. John. Jeff St. John, come on out. And he's going to be interviewing, as we said, Commissioner David Hochschild from the California Energy Commission.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Hey, great to see you again. Yeah, let's give a bigger round of applause there. These are big deals. These guys are big deals.
Thanks, Julian. I probably drink too much coffee, but apparently it doesn't affect my sleep. Chair Hochschild, David Hochschild of the California Energy Commission, thanks very much for joining us. I was going to ask you a question that this audience might already know, just to start. What is the California Energy Commission? What is it in charge of? And what do you do? How many people already know the answer to that question? Raise your hand. Okay. Well, maybe you can tell us a little bit for the folks who are here, and specifically what the CEC is doing that you think is really people should really focus on in terms of enabling the energy transition.
I will answer that, but first, what a week! What a week, right? Man, I have to say, this last few weeks, I found myself rooting for Marjorie Taylor Greene and James Comey and John Bolton, and rooting for the Dodgers in the World Series, and now feeling good after Election Day. I'm like, what is going on? So I've been at the Energy Commission as chair now for the last 6.5 years, and so we're California's energy policy and planning agency. We got about 1,000 people. We're doing everything we can to get California to 100% clean energy future. We're deploying about $4 billion on EV charging infrastructure. We're doing all the offshore wind process, energy storage, solar efficiency. We set all the codes and standards for new construction. We rank #1 in the United States on energy efficiency and water efficiency and want to keep it that way. And we operate what is, in my view, the best clean energy research and development program in the world. And so we're really, I think, as a state, the keepers of the flame of hope on the clean energy future, and that's what our agency is focused on, and we're going to stay on the path.
Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, what would you, we're doing pretty well so far, California. I don't know if you have a kind of a sense of kind of what has happened in, let's say, the last 4 years that you think is particularly kind of successful in terms of what California has been able to accomplish.
Yeah, so I'm struck by how many really significant milestones are pretty much totally unknown in this space. Really, I mean, California's been the incubator for the world on clean energy, right? We were the home for the first rooftop solar system in the world, first utility scale solar, first terrestrial wind, first energy storage project, first electric vehicle, first energy codes and standards. And that stuff is winning. Last year in the U.S., 96% of new capacity added to the grid was clean energy, and that wouldn't be the case but for California. And here at home, we're now almost 70% of the electricity coming from clean sources. Alternative energy is the wrong word to use to describe renewables. Fossil's alternative. We have more EV charge plugs than we have gasoline nozzles in California. 201,000 EV charge plugs, 120,000 gasoline nozzles. We just hit 29% of vehicle sales being electric. There we go. And, some just dazzling projects in this sort of galaxy of good things happening right here next door in Oakland. The first city in the U.S. to fully electrify their school bus fleet. So 74 buses, 74 chargers, and so 100% of the kids going to school on a public bus are going electric, and those buses come back in at the end of the day, and they charge and they send power back to the grid. It's the largest vehicle-to-grid project in the U.S. And this, I think, it's super compelling. It doesn't, get the attention that it deserves. But when you add it all up together, what is happening is we are transitioning to 100% clean energy future, and it's working. Because as we've done this, we've gone from the 10th biggest economy in the world to the 5th biggest, and we are pioneering all these new technologies of the future. We're hosting a group of 40 legislators in a month from around the country to come do a tour of all this electrification. We're taking them to Verity in Richmond, which is doing all-electric construction equipment, to Monarch in Livermore, which is doing electric tractors, to Zoom in Oakland with electric school buses. We're building a fleet of 5 battery electric ferries, here in San Francisco Bay, the first in North America. And we got Gradient doing super low-cost electric heat pumps, and Copper doing electric induction cooktops. I mean, all of this stuff, there's somebody from Copper right here. But all of this stuff taken together is super exciting. And I think, we together have to broadcast that this is happening and it's working. Not to sugarcoat any of the big challenges we're facing, but overall, Trump cannot put the genie back in the bottle. The energy transition is going to happen. Yeah.
Well, thanks for kind of outlining all the first-of-a-kind projects. I mean, the Zoom project is very cool across the channel from where I live in Alameda, and I got to go see that, and it's very cool. I guess the next challenge is to just multiply it, exponentially. And I know that there are a lot of pretty significant challenges to doing that. You mentioned the Trump administration as being one of them. But, I mean, within the state apparatus itself, I figured that one of the bigger ones that we have to face right now is the challenge of just scaling up the clean energy generation and storage capacity that we need. And I don't know if there's anything in particular that the CEC is doing there that we should touch on, including the new streamlined, expedited permitting process, the opt-in certification program. I know that there was a big project, the Darden energy storage, or energy is a solar and storage project down in Westland's Water District area that just got permitted. And what would you say, how would you describe how the CEC is managing this expedited permitting process and kind of managing the challenges that could come with that as communities are concerned about environmental issues, about, equity issues being brought to some of these, disadvantaged communities down there?
Yeah, so just to paint the context a little bit, for a long time, even as our population was growing in California, the energy demand stayed basically flat. And that's because we were making huge progress on energy efficiency. So we do all these standards at the Energy Commission for televisions that cut the energy use in half, and computers and lighting, moving from incandescent to LEDs and all these things. Now we're at the point where there's so much electrification happening, and because of the additional heat, there's more air conditioning load. So energy demand is going up, and we have to meet that need reliably and clean. And so we're deploying a lot more new power plants, but they're clean. So we have about, just for context, electricity came to California in the gold rush. 1850-ish in San Francisco was when the first light bulb went on. And in that 150 years since, 170 years, it's been basically 105 gigawatts of capacity have been added, okay, on the utility side, the utility scale generation. About 30 of that is just since Gavin Newsom became governor. Okay, so a huge amount of new capacity, and it's essentially what we're doing now. We have another 20 gigawatts in our pipeline. It's basically all solar and storage. That's what's dominating. That's what's cheapest. So you mentioned Darden. This was under a new fast-tracked permitting process that we have, and that's the largest battery project in the world, $5 billion project in West Fresno County. We're trying to do this stuff the right ways. We did 9 community benefits agreements to provide grants to the local community. That project, when they break ground in a few months, it's going to be 1,000 people put to work building that thing. And this is the future. And it's interesting to me how many other technologies get all this attention. I mean, I just think solar and storage is going to be the backbone, and then we'll be doing other things on top of that. But that has been really exciting, and it mirrors. I think there's technology innovation, and we just started a California battery hub to drive next generation battery technology. But there's something else just as important, which is process innovation. How do we do this stuff faster, better, more efficiently? And so, this new reform on doing the power plant process faster is important. And we did also a reform on the customer side of the meter, where we're now switching from doing, typically it was taking 30 to 60 days to permit rooftop solar and storage to now it's an instant over the internet permit. And so that feels good. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the CalApp program?
CalApp.
Like Solar App Plus and like Symbium and stuff like that. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the home front because, obviously the CEC is driving, solar permitting kind of standardization and automation. Obviously, efficiency codes are a big part of what you all do, and then EV charging incentives. What is happening recently that you think the audience should know about when it comes to what the CEC is doing on the places that we live and work?
Yeah, so every 3 years we do a new energy code. It's a really, really important thing because that makes our homes really efficient, but it also essentially becomes an incubator for new industries. So, the code we did a year ago, which basically is driving heat pumps mainstream, we're going to go from 1% of new construction being all electric a decade ago to pretty much 100% next year. And that's helping scale the heat pump industry. And then those industries can be better positioned to do retrofits on existing homes. And the same thing with rooftop solar. We're adding about a gigawatt of capacity annually just from the requirement that we put to have solar in every new building. And so those codes are really an important piece of the puzzle, and that's both for energy efficiency and for water efficiency, because we are doing shower heads, faucets, toilets, washing machines, all that stuff. So it all ties together.
I did want to ask. I know that there was an attempt by some groups to kind of put in a requirement for all new air conditioners to be bidirectional heat pumps. I think the CEC passed on that. I don't know if you can talk about how you guys kind of balance pushing the envelope on getting the requirements for new technologies against where you think the installers and the manufacturers of these equipment are at.
Yeah, no, that's coming. So we have an authority given to us by my now colleague and former state Senator Nancy Skinner. For those of you who know her, let's give her a round of applause. She's amazing. And we're super, super blessed to have her as a commissioner now at CEC. So she passed a law called SB 49, which, this is in support of this vision we all share to make everything that connects to the grid a good citizen of the grid and have the ability for the grid operators to dispatch these resources. So we did our first standard under that, which is for pool pumps, which is a pretty big load actually in California to make those dispatchable. But we are going to be doing that with heat pumps and a bunch of other appliances. And I think it's important when these things get rolled out to really try to stick the landing. And this is kind of the art of this type of policy making, because you can actually go too fast sometimes and then you fail and then your authority gets revoked, right? And so it's a balancing act of trying to stage these things in ways that are going to support long-term success. So we haven't gone as quickly as I would have liked, but that stuff is all coming.
Cool. And I know that, I mean, the CC is doing a lot of cool stuff on the kind of grid responsive stuff. I think that the Midas kind of database of rates that kind of, I don't know how it works, to be honest with you, but I got to go figure it out. It sends out kind of like differential rates across, across many different communications channels. You guys are doing the Redwoods program, kind of like, variable pricing for EV charging and stuff like that. How would you characterize the readiness of I guess, all of us in this room and everyone else who lives in California to have a bunch of stuff in their house and maybe the cars in their driveway be grid responsive against the anticipated kind of need and value of the CEC kind of pushing the envelope on getting all that stuff grid responsive?
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I'm here with my wife, who's in the back. Cynthia, you want to wave? And she was listening to the first part of the thing. She's like, "This is a total geek fest," and she's not wrong. So, welcome to our community, Cynthia. No, I mean, long term, we got to get there. Everything's got to get smarter, and I think we will get there. It'll happen in phases, and if you think about, for example, this project I just mentioned in Oakland with the electric school buses, the vehicle to grid, right? We have a huge amount of energy storage, on the system now. We have 17 gigs, but we have probably 3 to 4 times that amount on 4 wheels, right? With all that we're adding, 1,300 EVs a day. Vehicle to grid actually makes sense to start with buses. School buses are actually a great use case, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's an easier place to begin with vehicle to grid than with passenger vehicles, although it will happen eventually with passenger vehicles. So a lot of this is about staging the things that are best suited to work and where the barriers are lowest. So not everything will roll out at the same time, but I mean, that is where we're headed. And by the way, that is both a cleaner and a cheaper future, because to operate some of these standalone gas peaker plants that operate only a few hours, a year, I think the state spent like $1 billion on these, 3 once-through cooling gas plants on the coast, which hardly operate. That's incredibly costly, and you can actually meet that same need cleanly. And this is what we're trying to do with our virtual power plant now, the
Right.
demand-side grid support, where we've been scaling that in the last 3 years. We've gone from 0 to 1.2 gigawatts, which that's half the size of Diablo Canyon, and it's growing. And we have 100,000 people participating in that program with their home battery systems and so forth. And so that is what the future looks like.
Well, I think we should probably talk about demand-side grid support, DSGS, because this gets into some of the parts of what happened this year in state policy that I think folks are not maybe as thrilled about, certainly in the kind of in the group of people who are working on DSGS, because that program, as you said, it's scaled up really big. I think the Brattle Group has done some analysis showing how important it is. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory has a long-standing kind of study of the value of flexibility there. I know that PG&E called it the biggest VPP in the world when they ran a big test of it, but the budget has been cut. Julian and Mark mentioned the VPP bills that were vetoed by Governor Newsom, and I guess I'm wondering what's going on with that right now. How would?
Yeah, so that on those bills, that is above my pay grade. I will just make a vigorous defense of this program, because if you just step back and look at how it operates, this is really good for ratepayers. All right, we, the ratepayers, don't pay anything for this infrastructure. So you install a battery storage system and solar in your home, you pay for all of that, and then you sign up for this program and you get compensated when the grid needs you to send power back. And it's dispatchable, so that's what we want, is a button we can push so the power comes on. But we're not having to pay for the infrastructure. And it's also very fast to deploy. And I mean, I just want to highlight, when we are talking about, if you want to build a new gas power plant in the United States, it's 7 years out now, 2032, okay? The build cycles for these storage projects and residential storage projects are measured in months. And so this is coming online really quickly. This program, we will be bigger than Diablo Canyon, which is by far the biggest power plant in the state. And it's working. CAISO did a big test this summer. It was super successful, and I had the CEO of CAISO call me, kind of blown away at how well this has worked. And so, I am a big supporter and big believer, and I have shared that, with the governor and with everybody who will listen. This is a program that's working, and we got to keep the momentum going. And I think, the truth is, we have not had to do a flex alert in the last 3 years, and that's a function of the and that's a function of the success of this program and of adding all this other capacity. But one of the downsides of that, I think, is it makes it look like everything's solved, and
right.
So
it hasn't been that hot the last couple summers.
And we've got lucky with the climate, which I think we got to acknowledge. This was actually a pretty mild summer. The summer before that was the hottest summer and the highest energy demand in the history of the state, and we got through that without a flex alert and without an outage. But the sort of standard that we have to meet is increasing because load is increasing, and severe weather and so on. So this is an insurance policy, and I think it's a great deal. And so I'm all for keeping it strong.
Yeah, and I mean, it does appear. I know that there's been a lot of debate in the Public Utilities Commission and at CAISO, the state grid operator, about how to establish the kind of costs and benefits of programs like these. And it can get really complicated when you get into stuff like load impact protocols and just like how much load you did drop versus your baseline, and did these folks actually hit their prescribed resource adequacy kind of commitments and stuff like that. I think there's an interesting challenge perhaps amongst regulators of utilities to acknowledge that one simply has to keep doing something until it scales to the point where its cost effectiveness exceeds question. But I don't know if that's true, and I don't know how the CEC works with its fellow agencies, the PUC and CAISO, to kind of walk that middle road between allowing the perfect to be the enemy of the good and kind of choking these things off because one might deem that they're not cost effective in one way, versus opening the floodgates and maybe paying a bunch of Tesla Powerwall owners more than they deserve, I guess.
Yeah, look, I think, first of all, there's a constellation of agencies in this space in the state. We don't always see eye to eye and everything. And I think you got to enter the field knowing that there's some degree of healthy tension. But it's really important that we step back and learn the basic lesson about this whole movement, which is innovation does make things better and cheaper. And I come out of the solar industry. I spent most of my career. I got into it in 2000, and solar panels were the most expensive resource on the power market, by far, right? But if you just looked even then at the trends, every time global demand for solar doubled, the price goes down 20%, and you could see where that was going. And so we put a lot of work in, all of us, in this community, to scale those policies and to get the industry to go big and to continue to innovate. And now solar is the cheapest resource in the market. Literally, a 98% reduction in cost over the last 25 years. And we're not done, by the way. There's still a lot more cost reduction to happen, and that's bearing a ton of fruit for us. And so the same thing is true with these kind of policies and technologies. And so, when you're making an assessment about the value of a program like virtual power plants and so on, and some of the the bumps in the road. And I will be the first to say, not everything when we start off worked swimmingly. They say good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. We all have bumps in the road, but looking at the larger learning curve, it's very clearly promising and worth staying on this path.
I did want to make sure to give you a chance to talk about how the state and the CEC is kind of adapting to this new era of the Trump administration. I don't want to go through the litany of what the Trump administration is doing on a national level necessarily. I know that in California, I believe that there might have been some cuts to DOE funds for the CEC. I'm not sure. I know that there was speaking to representatives of tribes up in Humboldt County that lost their DOE grant for a microgrid project. And I think we're still kind of waiting to see what happens to some of the much larger kind of billion-dollar-plus grants for PG&E and the like. And I don't know if there. What can the state do in the face of that kind of clawback of funds?
Yeah, well, look, first I want to just share a little story. My wife made a really wonderful point about a month ago. We had this neighbor after Trump was elected. We live here in Berkeley, and our neighbor printed out these little signs, instead of handprint, just said resist. And so everyone in our neighborhood had these in our windows for a while. And Cynthia said after a while, that word doesn't capture the totality of what we need. It's not actually kind of the operative word. The real word is create. And she shared this quote, which really resonated for me, from Buckminster Fuller, something to the effect of, don't fight to tear down or dismantle old paradigms, build a new paradigm that by virtue of its success will make the old paradigm obsolete, right? And
that's cool.
Yeah, and that is what we have to do. And we're doing that, in energy, we're doing that in democracy, I would say. And I really see us in California leaning into this create mode. Luckily, we're a well-resourced state, and so, yes, there has been arson committed by the Trump administration on all of our federal agencies, on so many worthy grant programs, including for the tribes. And by the way, that's especially egregious. How many promises have been broken to Native American tribes in this country and in this state? But we're not going to let that, no, we're not going to accept that. We at the Energy Commission have done $130 million for 35 Native American tribes to do tribal energy sovereignty projects, solar, battery, microgrids, and EV charging, and we're all in on that. So not going to let that stop us.
Right.
But also to recognize it does make everything harder, and it's going to make things more expensive, because you take away solar, wind tax credits and that kind of thing. We're really impacted by that. So this is definitely headwinds, but I think we will get through the storm. We've done that before. We have a really powerful muscle, I would say, of being a state that can survive a lot. I mean, just looking back at the last 5 years, I'm a native California. I can't remember a period where there were this many crises kind of compressed with wildfire and COVID and blackouts and drought and Trump and so on. And I think one of the things that comes out, and I'm putting him in that category, but
biblical plague.
Yeah, it's pretty biblical. But I do think you build a muscle of how to navigate through that, and a will to do that. And I just feel, super blessed to be in a state that's basically aligned on this and have a governor who's committed. So we're going to get through. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that I know I've talked to the folks at Blue Lake Rancheria, which was a CEC-funded, I think, EPIC microgrid grant. And I think that, the CEC has funded some of the most significant microgrids in the country. I could be wrong. Yeah. Besides military bases and stuff like that. So
that's a great story. That is a 2017 grant we did, $5 million, 480 kW solar microgrid, first tribal energy microgrid, and that's in a community on the north coast where these tribes are losing power like 10 times a year. Power is like it's like water as a utility. People depend on it for medical devices and so on. This was an area that was getting a lot of fires that were burning transmission lines. Right after the microgrid went in, we called them because there was a fire that did burn down the transmission line, and their light stayed on. The communities went off, and our phone call was the one that let them know the power had gone off everywhere else because the light stayed on, and they kept the first aid clinic going, and then they've been really helpful, that tribe, in talking to others and helping other tribes do microgrids like that.
Yeah, that is a cool story, and it's also, I think, more cost effective perhaps than the alternative. I mean, I don't know what it would cost for PG&E to reduce the level of outages along those very long, kind of relatively low voltage transmission corridors into that area, but I would imagine that there are ways to reduce costs there for rural residents. I am wondering if there's any kind of work that you think the CEC is doing that kind of brings its experience with innovative utilization of these technologies that are getting cheaper and cheaper, solar and batteries primarily, to play in really laser focusing on the drivers of utility rate increases that we heard about earlier, essentially the fixed costs of largely distribution assets right now. I know that's more of a CPUC thing, to be precise, but is there any work that's going on that's kind of like marrying those two things?
I think we're at the point where it's not about new technology. It's really about the programs to make use of this existing technology. And so it's the demand side grid support virtual power plant program. And that's why that's so important. That's actually the innovation that matters now. We're adding about 1,300, we're up now to 2,000 customer-owned battery systems a week in California. And that technology works. And so how to make use of those so that they can actually support the grid because for grid reliability, it's not that many hours a year where we're really concerned about potential outages, like 30 to 60 hours a year. And it's July, August, September, 4 to 9. And so it's really, just very pinpoint. And so you can build a super expensive, massive, high cost to maintain centralized power plant, or you can just tap into this distributed network that's also scaling faster, and that's the way we got to go. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think we're getting close to time, so let me ask you one last question, which is what have I forgotten to ask you so far?
Well, maybe I'll just close with just a story. The tribal work has been, for me, one of the most extraordinary and special and rewarding parts of this job. And I think there's a story in the North Coast of what the tribes have done up there that we should all take some hope and inspiration from, because the Hoopa, the Karuk, Bear River, Yurok, a bunch of these tribes have done an amazing thing in taking down the 4 dams on the Klamath. So the largest dam removal project in the world. And at the same time, there was something else very beautiful that happened, again, led by the tribes, which was to bring back the condor. So, 100 years ago, the hunters that came into that part of the state, used lead bullets. The condor don't eat anything that's alive. They just eat carrion. And they would go to the carcass of a deer or an elk that had been shot, and they'd get lead poisoning. They became extinct in that region of the state. And the population went down something like 22 birds or something. And then they had this very, very focused, successful program to incubate the birds back. And in the Yurok culture, the condor, so it's the highest flying bird in that region, 9.5-foot wingspan. They live to 75 years old. They're incredible birds. And they're thought in that culture to be the medium for humanity's hopes to express to the heavens, and then because they're so high flying, to then in turn confer wisdom down to people. So you can imagine the significance of losing this bird. And so I went to go watch this condor reintroduction, and I'd never even seen a live condor, and I just felt all this emotion coming up through me. I'm feeling it now, just telling this story is so magical. And now the condo are back, and they're introducing 6 birds a year. And I just think, I think all of us hold in our hearts the desire to actually not just leave the world as we found, leave it better than we found it. And that story of restoration is one I think we can all take home with us. So
Awesome.
thank you, guys.
High flying. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.
Wow. Okay. I was, shout out Klamath River restoration. I wasn't expecting that. That's awesome. They got the dams out, and then the salmon are already running all the way back up to the headwaters. You can actually restore nature with a little effort and focus. It turns out. So, very exciting time of the night. We're heading to networking break. Quick thank you again to the sponsors. Marin Clean Energy, Hydrostor, Lunar Energy, Advanced Energy United, which I said before and am saying again is a sponsor, and they're great. And then our media sponsors, Alert the Globe, which is broadcasting live to the globe, and Watts News, our video partner. And we're going to bring the Gamper drums back out to play during the recess. And please go meet people, go make some friends, talk to at least 3 people you don't know. And then we're coming back here at 8 o'clock sharp, all right? 8 o'clock. Here, listen for meditative sounds to lure you back, and have some fun.
How about that jazzy, funky superstition? I don't have a chart, but it's just straight melody down. I guess E flat or E reference.
Whatever you want, right? What do you say?
E flat or E.
Yeah?
E. All right.
Thank you guys so much. Frank Martin over here on the keys, on the piano. Lincoln Adler on the saxophone. Gary Brown on the bass. I'm Chris Gamper. They let me up here on the drums. Can you believe this? These guys, unbelievable. Thank you, Freight and Salvage. Thank you for Canary Media. And we are out in the world, sharing this with the world with Alert the Globe. So thank you. And also on Gigaverse. We're all over the place. Let's hear it for green energy. Love you guys. We'll be right back.
That's it?
All right, okay. If you can hear my voice, start coming back into your seats, which are great seats. I think they're very comfortable. They look to be. Let's give it up for the band, the Gumper Drums Live. I love jazz, and to get to like merge the worlds of live jazz and in-depth clean energy discussions doesn't happen every day. So I hope you appreciate that as much as I do. And we appreciate everybody coming in through the doors and coming and finding their seats, because that is what needs to happen now. But did y'all like the first act? Was there any favorite moments? Did you have a favorite moment from the first act? Yeah, I think the condor story, I was very impressed by. We don't always have large avian species brought up at Canary Media events, but that was quite inspiring. And I've done a lot of reading about like the dam building in the West and how destructive it was, and that's a very hopeful story. You can take out the dams, let the rivers flow free again, and suddenly like these enormous species are returning in a very hopeful way. Yeah. Did anyone make new friends out there? Make a little noise if you talked to someone you didn't know. Yeah? That's great. Okay. I always think like you go to weddings and there's all these people that were handpicked to be in the same place because they're the favorite people of the wedding couple, and like there's usually very little infrastructure to encourage them to talk to each other. And so I hope y'all kind of did that for yourselves here tonight. Made some friends. So, yeah, I'm vamping. But we are basically, I think we've got just about everybody in here that we want in here. So, yes, the second act tonight is largely going to be about the Dave Roberts podcast recording with Kim McCutler. But before that, we have a little message that's going to be fun for our friends Ed Gunn at Lunar Energy, and my colleague and friend, and she's kind of the secret weapon behind the Canary Media functioning, Maria Virginia Olano. She's our chief of staff, and yeah, why don't we bring you all up to get that going? I think we've got a critical mass here. Yeah, they're gonna have a little chat, and then we get into podcast recording. So thank you. Yeah. Are you do you want to sit down, or are we good? Okay, cool. Or stand.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for being here. If we haven't met, I am Maria Virginia Olano. I'm Chief of Staff here at Canary Media, and I'm here with Ed. Ed, why don't you tell us a little bit about Lunar Energy?
Thank you very much. I think before we get started, though, I want to say thank you for having us. And it's nice to support independent journalism. I think we need it more now than ever. So, yeah, well done.
Thank you.
So my name's Ed. I lead growth at Lunar Energy. What do we do at Lunar Energy? We exist to power homes around the world with endless clean energy. We do that in two ways. So we electrify everything. And we have a battery we're rolling out across the US right now. And then we control and optimize everything as well. And so we do that with our control software, customer-facing and grid-facing control software. So that's a little bit about Lunar.
So we've heard a lot about affordability. I think affordability is on everybody's mind. Tell us how you see Lunar Solutions delivering real value for your customers.
Sure. I think affordability, it's got to be at the heart of everyone in the energy transition, and it's no different for Lunar. So I'd say for affordability, Lunar's riding a few different waves, probably three waves. The first wave is folks may have heard about the regulation changes, the tax changes around rewarding companies that manufacture in the US. Okay, so Lunar's been manufacturing its battery in the US. made that decision many, many years ago. And so our customers effectively get a more cost-effective product. These same regulation changes and tax changes mean that going into 2026, there's going to be way more competition in financing for people getting into solar storage. So there's going to be loads more options next year for no money down or low money down solar storage solutions. So that lowers the barrier for people to get into solar storage. I think the second wave is retail rates, like interesting retail rates. We've looked at, I think most of the energy nerds in the room know about Hawaii, California, Texas. And these smart energy rates are rates that we can optimize against with our smart software, and that saves customers more money. And I think the third wave, we all heard David from the CEC speak about VPPs. So I've had 5 conversations already tonight that VPPs are dying. Oh my goodness, DSGS has been defunded. What's the future of VPPs? I can assure you VPPs are alive and kicking. It's just an evolution in the VPP growth. Even here, where we're at now in Berkeley, this is the AVA Community Energy Service Territory. So this electricity on the lights here is powered by AVA. AVA are actually one of Lunar's partners, and we're helping them build out VPPs for next year. And again, we love VPPs because, as David said, they satisfy lowering customer costs and also managing grid demand. So I know there are a few AVA people out here today. I can't see because of the lights, but way to go, AVA, wherever you are. You! I also just got to say, can I do a quick shout out to our friends at Silicon Valley Clean Energy and Peninsula Clean Energy, because we're super, wherever you are, I know you're there somewhere. We just signed them as well. So we're going to be working with them to build out their VPPs in the coming year as well.
Awesome. So, distributed energy resources as a sector has often valued this approach of like, you want to put this in your home so you can become an island, right? You get your battery, you get your solar, you get maybe an EV, so you can unplug from the grid. I know that's not necessarily your approach. Tell us why working with utilities and not necessarily completely islanding is the right approach.
So we love utilities. Can I say that here to this audience? Utilities put their rates up. We get a call. Can I buy a battery? But seriously, that's how it works, literally. But seriously, when you think about a battery as a tool to island you from the grid, you think about it as a tool to help you snip the wires and go off grid or grid defect. We think that massively undervalues the category. All right, batteries can do so much more. So much more. And then if you think about a utility, they're not really the enemy. I know it feels like it sometimes, but they're really not. Let me explain. So utilities set the rules, okay? Utilities work with regulators to set the rules. And they're actually really helpful because utilities publish the rule set. They publish the rule book. Whenever they publish their rates and tell us their electricity rates, that's them publishing a massive invitation to a party, all right? And that invitation is saying, come to our party, we want you to play, we want to see what you can do with our utility rates. So at Lunar, we take them up on that every single day for our customers, and we use our smart software to optimize around those rates, and we save our customers a bunch of money. So in a way, we see ourselves at Lunar and our job to make the utility work for our customers rather than the other way around. And that, again, drives costs down.
So tell us about Lunar AI and how you all are using software, layering on top of your hardware products to deliver more value.
I think, are we the first people to talk about AI tonight? I'm surprised it took this long. So it feels like we've been at the AI party for a long time. It feels like when we started there, nobody else was at the party. We were waiting for other people to arrive. We've been doing this for about 10 years, building out this software platform, this AI for 10 years internationally. And it's really easy to explain. Let me explain what Lunar AI is, okay? So Lunar AI in your battery, it knows your utility rate. It also has predicted how much electricity you're going to use in your home and consume in your home and generate in your home, because it's plugged into weather data, it's plugged into, and it learns your energy behaviors over time. Okay, so we've built an AI tool just there in the last 10 seconds. Let's throw some challenges at it. Let's throw a simple one. Cheap daytime electricity, great. Let's capture that, let's store it, let's use it at night to offset evening peaks. Easy. Everyone knows that one. Now let's think about PG&E, your PG&E rate, which is offering you some juicy export credits tonight, Thursday night. The AI needs to optimize around harvesting as many of those export credits as you can. And then why don't we layer in a VPP now? Okay, so Ava Community Energy, with their beautiful VPP that's coming soon, is going to offer you a VPP dispatch payment tonight or tomorrow or the day after. Okay, so really what the AI does is making a decision around how best to capture all of this value for the customer and manage that benefit with the grid. And we don't expect any of our customers to be energy nerds or even understand this. I mean, who understands how complex the California and the US grid is? You know, most normal people, we're all energy nerds here, not calling you guys normal people, but most normal people don't understand this, and we don't ask them to. We like the idea of it being an energy nerd in your pocket. It never goes to sleep. It never complains. It just works every day to save you more money.
Awesome. So again, I think as everyone in this room knows, 2025 has been a bit of a turbulent year in terms of energy markets. What are you looking forward to in 2026? What are you excited about?
Christmas. I don't know. I think we're all masochists in this room. It's a hard industry to be in, but where do I start? I think there's bad news and there's good news. So bad news first. The electricity system is only going to get more complicated going into next year. But don't worry, good news is if you have smart devices that are able to capture that complication and solve that complication for you, you're doing a great job. I think the second piece would be make sure your electrons are American electrons. We talked about that made in America piece. It's going to drive more value for you, and obviously it's good for America. And then I think thirdly, just don't panic. We've been here before. We've had tough years before in the energy industry, and there is a ton of value out there. It's just going to be harder to get hold of, harder to capture, but with more smart devices on the grid, we can absolutely do it.
Yay. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Ed, and thanks all of you for coming out and for being with us. We have one more exciting part of the program. Thanks all.
Thank you very much.
All right. Very exciting time. We are heading into our live podcast recording hosted by Dave Roberts. So I was thinking back to a decade ago when I was a young climate reporter just getting started. There was this guy I would read because he seemed to actually know what all this stuff was and what all the terms meant and could kind of talk about the real story behind the story. And that was Dave Roberts, and it's been such a pleasure. He's a sort of friend of Canary. We get to work together and do these live shows together, and he's got a voice that I find very mesmerizing, and hopefully you will too. So we're going to bring him up. And then Kim Cutler here, who's investing in early stage climate solutions, and they're going to have a chat. So, you can laugh and cry and everything. We are doing a live podcast recording, so try not to make other extraneous noises. And let's kick it off with a very warm Canary Live welcome for these two great people here.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Julian, for that introduction that emphasized my advancing years. Hello, Kim. Thanks, everybody, for coming. So just to give a little context here, I don't know how much people know about what's going on here, but Kim and I are going to talk about YIMBYism, basically. California YIMBYism, broader YIMBYism questions and dilemmas, history of YIMBYism, etc. And the reason we're doing this, for the most part, among other things, is that Kim, back in, I think, 2014, you wrote an essay on the internet called "Burrowing Owls Create..."
How burrowing owls create vomiting anarchists.
How burrowing owls create vomiting anarchists. It was an essay on Medium, and then became a book, and then became an illustrated book.
A comic book.
This is what every internet writer dreams of, is you just pop off your 4,000 word piece, and people care, and they read it, and they pass it around, and it becomes a book, and it's remembered years later. So maybe let's just start there. Why in 2014? You were financial and tech journalist for a while, and then you moved into investing. Why write this essay in the first place? Like, what did you hope?
I was a journalist at the time. I was covering the technology industry. A bit more context about myself. I grew up in the Bay Area. My parents worked in the tech industry. My grandparents worked in the tech. I mean, like, I have a long history in the Bay Area, and so like, you know, I grew up with my dad going around and remembering like what you know, coffee shop or restaurant someplace was like 40 years ago. There's a sense of time there, and having grown up in the South Bay in Cupertino, this was the home to some of the world's most valuable technology companies, like Apple, and now NVIDIA, and you know, Oracle, the Oracle headquarters along the peninsula when it was there, Google and Meta, previously Facebook, and that whole, you know, this whole time, all these companies were kind of exploding while I was growing up, and yet the built environment looked exactly the same. I grew up in a house that was built in the 60s. If I go back to the street where I was, you know, raised, my parents, who are in their 60s and 70s, are basically like spring chickens on the block. And I just was sort of wondering at that time, like, how were we creating so many job opportunities for people, and the built environment wasn't seeing us, you know, an even remotely comparable rate of change. And then around that time, while I was living in San Francisco, there were also the Google bus protests, and I was wondering, well, why are we fighting over all this space? Like, why can't we just build more housing? And so then I started asking the question, why can't we build more housing? And then I started researching it, and I started talking to people who had, you know, been around for all the development battles of the 70s and the 80s and whatnot in the Bay Area, and just realized it was this complicated thicket of zoning laws, property taxation norms, and I was realizing just to explain it all, it was going to take that long. And so, like, I just spent 2 months working on it, and then one night in April, I just, like, hit publish and blog post or whatever.
It was on Medium originally, I believe.
Well, no, it was actually on TechCrunch. So it was like we were using blog post. That's, I think, that, or Blogspot. Yeah, or blog. Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Yeah, one of the things when I was reading it the other day, and one of the funny things about it is sort of in the middle, you're like, some of these tech companies might end up getting kind of big, like, you know, you were talking about like Google and Meta or whatever, and it's
or
just
Stripe, or like, I think it was Stripe or Airbnb. I can't remember.
Stripe might take off, you know, just these companies that now we think of like globe bestriding. You know, it's just weird to think back that they were like long shots at some point, or small at some point. So, as a journalist, like, you know, because the piece has a point of view. Like, did you sort of come to it with YIMBY inclinations?
I mean, the question I had is like an obvious, why can't we just build more stuff? Like, why can't we just do this? You know.
And so let's talk about one of the things I'm interested in is kind of what is unique to California and what is broader, because there's sort of the housing crisis, unaffordable housing, NIMBYs, et cetera, that general cluster of things is facing almost every big city, almost every big city in North America and beyond North America. So there are clearly some universal features, but California, I think, has particularly weird thicket of history about this. So maybe just to hit a couple of the big ones, maybe just start with Prop 13, everybody's favorite.
I mean, in the 70s, I mean, how many people know what Prop 13 is here?
Prop 13?
How many people don't know what it is? There's some people who don't know what it is. Yeah, so I mean, in the 70s...
It's not a characteristic room.
I mean, we were not in a dissimilar position in the 1970s. Housing and rent costs were growing really fast. Homeowners were getting really stressed out about their property tax bills, and so this man named Howard Jarvis in the 1970s worked on a ballot initiative campaign. And as you know, some of us in California, you can raise money and put if you raise enough money and get enough signatures, you can get something on the ballot in California, and then it can become part of our state constitution, which is why our state constitution is, I believe, what the world's like third longest governing document, and includes like specific laws about like what kind of fishing nets you can use in Santa Barbara. But yeah, people were frustrated at the time. It was there was stagflation, and voters were upset, and there's probably a larger backstory about schools and integration that also intersects with this as well. But suffice to say, there was a property tax revolt in 1978, and voters passed this law where your property tax rate can grow no more than 2% a year, based on when you first purchased it. And on the face of it, like that, being able to stay in your home and continue to afford your property tax bills. I think there's a lot that sounds, like people have paid for their homes. At the same time, like the cost of servicing those homes with like roads and police and schools and fire may grow faster than 2% a year. And so then if you compound that over 30 or 40 years, you end up with a situation where you live on a street and someone's paying like a tenth the property tax bill as someone else is for the same level of public services. And when it comes to housing development, I can think the more important piece to that is like, you can have people who are sitting on like gas stations or vacant lots of land that aren't really being used in the best way possible. I think I mentioned to you before we went on stage, like there's literally like an ashram in Oakland, on the border of Emeryville and North Oakland, and it owns these huge parcels of land, half of which are vacant, and no one can figure out how to get, these pieces of land have been vacant for like decades, when they could be turned into housing or some other best use for like the local neighborhood. But people can just kind of sit on land forever, and their carrying costs don't go up that dramatically, and so it's a disincentive to actually develop the land for housing or more, better use by more people. So I think that's probably the more salient point. And now, as this housing crisis and this affordability crisis has spread outside of California, we're starting to see like, I think almost like Prop 13 redux discourse in other states, like Texas passed a larger exemption for long-standing homeowners, and then the governor of Florida, DeSantis, he's been talking about like, let's abolish all property tax. And then I'm like, how are you going to pay for your school? I don't understand how you're going to pay for your public schools.
All those are private in the Florida future. Yeah, so you get this crazy, like, you really got to like think this through. If you're like buying a house in 1970 and your property tax goes up by 2% a year, and then
at most,
at most it's capped at 2% a year, but then like other people who are selling their homes and their property taxes are getting updated to the current level, so you end up in California with like basically two classes of people.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it's almost like you called it an entitlement program, but it's like, what if we created an entitlement program but just handed out the benefits randomly by who happened to be owning their house longest? Yeah. It's like the most bizarre, unmotivated entitlement program in history.
But I mean, I think from the city's perspective, it creates this weird situation, or it did create this weird situation for many decades where, okay, well, your tax base is only rising this much from your residential homeowners. Let's see how we can raise money to pay for everything somehow else. And so that created like, I mean, maybe y'all are into that. I mean, like California's famous strip malls are all about like optimizing for sales tax revenue in the face of like capped, residential tax revenue. And I mean, I think if you drive to Emeryville over the border, Emeryville famously has all those. That's for sales tax revenue that could effectively be going to Oakland, or it's a revenue capture opportunity.
And the crazy thing to me about this, and I don't know if you know anything about the history of how this happened, but it's one thing to implement this for people who stay in their homes. Fine, you want people to not have to move, but to be able to hand it off to your children.
Well, they did fix part. I mean, I think the commercial piece is probably like, this also applies to office buildings. So office buildings, like, there's a lot of office buildings where famously like 49% of the building transact in order to maintain the old assessment. So, and the state of California did try to run a proposition a few years ago just to amend it for commercial and not for residential, and that failed.
Oh no, really?
Yeah.
Well, it's crazy to be able to hand it off to your kids, because then you're just creating like an entitlement aristocracy almost. Like
Yeah,
these
but that was
these
actually
family.
they did revise that, and so I think it's not like one for one, but now I think you do get if a child inherits a property, if they don't. So previously, if your child just inherited it but didn't even reside in it as their primary home, they just got to keep the tax basis forever. But now, if you don't live in it, I think it gets reassessed, and then even if you do live in it, it gets slightly reassessed, but not like to the full amount. So they did kind of close that over the last couple of years.
Can you explain to someone who doesn't live in California? Like I'm not a Californian, and I have just in the course of like reading around come across the fact that Prop 13 is crazy, and it's like ruining California politics and ruining the California economy, and like why would you do that? Like its negative effects I think are, I feel like, very well and broadly understood, and yet it persists for 30 years and you can't get rid of it. What are the politics of it? It seems like who supports it except for that class of people who happen to have lived in their homes for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at who turns out for like what is the median voter here is going to be someone who's probably an older homeowner. And so I think the residential politics of it are probably I don't think I think that's a very difficult path, but I mean I think if it's possible to revisit commercial again, I think that would be.
You think that's possible?
That's probably more interesting, like office or commercial.
So you don't think there's any political prospect? Like nobody's talking, no California lawmakers talking actively about.
Not a legislative or initiative approach.
That's interesting and also crazy. Talk a little bit about. I feel like one of the things facing climate movement and the YIMBY movement is its relationship with labor, which is somewhat fraught. What is the current state of relations between the YIMBY movement and the labor movement? What is the labor movement's sort of disposition toward?
I mean, I think there have been some pretty significant breakthroughs in the last 2 years alone. I think there was Buffy Wicks's bill in the 2024 session. Buffy Wicks is our local assembly member, where then she, that piece of legislation worked out a deal with the carpenters union. There's many different trades and unions. Some are more like YIMBY friendly, and some are less YIMBY friendly. And then I think SB 79 was a really big deal as well this past year, and that was a bill to build like tall housing near transit stops, like bus, train stations, and that kind of stuff. And that was like on the third attempt. That bill is like essentially 7 years in the making to get that done. But like there has been a shift where parts of labor are coming around and recognizing like, I think the politics are very different than 10 years ago. 10 years ago it felt.
But why? Like just intuitively, not knowing the details, like if a movement comes along and says we need to build lots more stuff on the surface, that seems like it would be incredibly attractive to the unions of people who build stuff. So like why were they ever opposed? What was the
I mean I think part of it is like the politics of wanting like in parts of the state where it is more expensive, in San Francisco you can do things like more projects pencil with having skilled and trained labor or having prevailing wage or any of those types of benefits and protections, but like it's really hard to make as I understand it's really hard to make those numbers work in the Central Valley or in other parts of the state. So the question is like it's a dilemma of like, do you want to impose the kinds of things that the cost structure in an expensive part of California can justify, but maybe like completely makes projects not pencil in other parts of the state? I think that's the difficult politics of it. And I think in general, when you talk about like the idea of abundance politics, like abundant, there are a lot of components and pieces of it. There are trade-offs. There are inherent trade-offs. If I want to say like I want abundant childcare, for example, like there are people who are working to provide that childcare, and they're going to care about being compensated. So they're like there's a trade-off. Do you pay people more, and then childcare becomes inherently less expensive, and so that's a negotiation that happens in the political process.
Well, kind of on a similar vein, one of I feel like the tensions in California housing policy is, on the one hand, you have lots of progressives who want to, they want subsidized housing, they want low-income housing, and they want developers to pay for it. So basically, like if you're developing a big building, you have to set aside X number of apartments for low income, or you have to pay into a fund for low income. And the idea, again, is sort of a nice idea, but as you say, there's a trade-off. Like anything you do to increase the cost of building is gonna, on the margins, reduce building. So I wonder what you make of that ongoing tension between kind of I'd say more the pure sort of abundance market yimbys who are just like, build more market housing.
Yeah.
That's the overriding goal. Everything else should be aiming at that. And then sort of like, I guess, more traditional progressives who have a lot of ideas about exactly how and for whom, et cetera. How do you tell us a little bit about that tension and like where it sits today?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, I mean, a lot of it is cyclically dependent and also dependent on which market you're operating in. And, you know, there was a period of time in San Francisco and the Bay Area, you know, pre-interest rate increase that it was possible for lots of things to pencil and you could ask for all these community benefits.
Right.
I think the current environment where rates are much higher than they were during the ZIRP period, and also we have complete and total uncertainty about how much inputs cost in terms of supplies because of tariffs and like the labor supply. I think it's very difficult to understand what and how things pencil right now, and so that's creating a shift back in the other direction towards like let's just have less, let's complicate things less. I mean, I think when you talk to progressives, ultimately, like, would they rather see a lot, like if you talk to real, true, pure progressives, like if they had a magic wand and they could make it not necessarily come from new housing and it could come from all, like I'm sure they would do that, but like the political feasibility of it all makes it, you know, easier to demand it on a project by project basis for them.
Yeah. Do you take a personal side in that debate? Like what, like ideologically or is that just like empirically, do you think it's true that if you just went full hog on market rate housing, that it would have the effect eventually of bringing costs down for everyone and have even better equity effects than explicitly equity-related provisions? Or do you have an opinion on that?
I think if you look at the case of like Oakland built a lot of downtown housing, and by the end of the building cycle, I mean, I think if you looked at the median AMI in some of those newer buildings, it was actually like 80% AMI from what it was lower than area median because there was so much of it. But of course, now it's very hard for projects to pencil in Oakland now because they, you know, built more. But I probably obviously lean more towards like, don't make perfect the enemy of the good. And, you know, if you tax new housing to provide like a tiny amount of deed restricted housing, I'd rather just have more housing altogether.
Yeah. What, you have written that this is something that's on my mind a lot about the housing debate, which is the sort of distinction between, I guess, just pure housing, like building units, and I guess what you'd call urban systems or urban environments, which are composed of, as we know, multiple overlapping systems of various kinds. So do you worry, like I do, that just building more without more concern about how it interacts with transit or how it interacts with services, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Who's thinking holistically, and are we thinking that enough?
I do think the crowning bill this year, SB 79 is literally a transit-oriented bill. It is literally we are going to build, you know, mid-rise to higher buildings around BART stations and transit stops. So it is absolutely thinking about the entire system and making it all work together. I don't think the majority of if you actually look at what has passed in California, the combination of what has actually worked is primarily ADUs, and then, you know, now we're finally getting into some more significant transit-oriented development legislation, but it's taken like 6 or 7 years to get here.
Yeah. What? Just on the sort of the same question, like, say you have housing and it's transit served. There's the other stuff on top of that, like amenities or like shops close by. How important do you think all that stuff is for policymakers to work out, or do you just sort of think like build transit served housing and the rest will?
I mean, I mean, at a high level, I sort of just trust it will work out, but also just knowing lots of folks in Bay Area urban planning, like most of the people I know who actually work for these departments are quite concerned about ground floor retail. Like I have like the privilege of, I live in Berkeley. I talk to folks who work for Oakland's department of San Francisco. They're all highly concerned about retail and like.
Yeah, just like walkability, livability. Yeah. It's one thing I worry about, like in Seattle, where we get density is sort of explicitly and only around car corridors, basically.
Okay.
So all our new density is like gross, cheap apartments alongside stroads, basically. So it's like, it's density, it's housing, we're housing people, but it's like, you wouldn't want to live there if you didn't have to.
What did you call it? Did you call it gross cheap housing? Because like I'm sure the Bay Area would like a lot more gross cheap housing.
I mean, it's better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
But like,
I'm not sure we even have that. So.
Yeah, I just like, for one thing, you just like move the apartments one block off the car corridor, and then like everything's so much more pleasant and so much more livable. And
yeah,
anyway, this is a Seattle problem. You should listen to my interview with Katie Wilson, who's running for mayor of Seattle. What do you? I want to talk about all the laws that were passed, but I'm sort of curious about, like, it seems like the state has gotten religion on this somewhat. Like, action is happening. Yeah. You go focus in on some of the local communities. They're not all on board. And now you have these laws that are sort of imposing targets and stuff on local communities. What do you make of the current, like, tension between local and state communities, and are you worried at all?
There have been several. I mean, there's been several attempts at running a ballot in they've never gotten very far, but there've been several attempts at like, can we have people trying to run like a Prop 13 of zoning type of ballot initiative, and like, I mean, in this state, people can do that. At the same time, it's like, I think the voter population has changed. Everyone is 10 years older than they were 10 years ago. Sorry.
I know. Such a depressing. So depressing. So true.
Yeah. When I started, I was in my 20s, but then now I'm older, and I've had time to see like, well, some of my friends have been able to stay here, but other people have had to leave or had to move because they couldn't afford it here. And I just, and like a lot of those people are now in office. And like they all have personal experience about that, and that's just very different than I think the legislators that were in power like 10, 20 years ago. And and then at the same time, there's like the reality of the math of like the electoral college and the congressional maps and like where seats are going, and you can see it on a map, like who's going to be adding seats in 2030 and who's going to be losing seats. And I think people are starting to really see that there are just real consequences for national policy just because people can't build housing here.
Yes, as I have said many times. Maybe as we just say for people who aren't following, what is California just passed? Prop 50? Is it 50?
Oh, yeah.
That they just passed?
Yeah, that's a little bit different. I mean, I'm talking, that's like just drawing like the map, like that's drawing map. I'm just talking about the total number of congressional seats and the total number of electoral, like I think Florida and Texas are adding like 2, 3, 4 seats, and then California is probably potentially losing 4 seats.
And this is, I'll just pause to emphasize this because I really feel like this particular message is not getting out enough. These are not local fights. Like if California loses population density, it loses representatives, and Texas gets more. And that's national politics. Those like national laws getting passed on the back of this. So like these are not local effects. So let's talk about these laws. It must be heady to be part of this movement? Because it seemed like, watching from the outside, it's been like a lot of yelling and futility and banging heads against the wall, and then kind of it feels like all of a sudden things are happening. Does that ring true? And
Yeah, I mean,
like, why is it just the turnover of? You think it's just age?
no, I mean, there's
generational?
a lot of organizational empowerment. At the end of the day, so I wrote that piece in 2014. Somewhere between 2014 and 2018, I met someone named Brian Hanlon. Brian Hanlon was a PhD forestry. He's a forestry PhD who started really caring about zoning politics and building housing. And then he had this kind of zany idea to work with the state senator then representing this area, Nancy Skinner, to author a bill in, I think it was 2017 or 2018. And he actually wrote it, worked with her staff, and got it passed. And that was sort of the inception of California EMB. And then that organization got founded around that time. I joined the board, and then since then, that organization has passed more than 20 laws, liberalizing housing zoning, everything from making it easy to build ADUs, making it easy to, I think this year there's a third-party permit shot clock if you don't get your housing approved in time, you start doing third-party permitting, or review. Making it easier to build junior accessory dwelling units in a garage or in your house, making it easier to build. I think there was Buffy Wicks's bill last year, making it easier to build housing on kind of commercial lots, the strip mall category. There's been so many different things that I think it was at the beginning it was a bill or two a year, but now this year the last 2 years it's been I think the organization itself is involved with 10, a dozen or so laws, but if you actually a year, but then if you actually look at the whole canon of housing laws, California is doing 40 a year.
Yeah, that's wild. And I sort of was worried that when things really got rolling, there would be backlash, but I don't know, if you feel differently. But
there's definitely backlash.
I mean, I know that some people are angry, but it doesn't seem like the progress is going to slow, or it seems like the boulder's rolling downhill at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it's just time. You can't go that long with you grow up here, and then your kids can't live near you, your grandkids can't live near you. You're losing electoral college votes. Come on,
So I have two questions about all this legislation that's passed. One is, what's your favorite? And by which I mean, which do you think is going to have the largest effects?
The largest effect by far has been ADU laws. Bar none. It's been it's more than a fifth of the new housing that's built in California, and it's simple because it's literally the person, it's their own backyard, it's the thing that they own. Also, there isn't a bunch of what is it, everything bagel written into it. A lot of mid-size or large projects get everything bageled. It's got to have
X number of low income, X labor agreements, et cetera, et cetera.
And then ADUs are just you want to do it? You could, sure. So, and then in different parts of the state, it can be much more economical to build it. I mean, I think it's still somewhat expensive in the Bay Area just because of the cost of labor. But down in Southern California or inland, it's much more accessible to do. But that had if you just look at raw number of units enabled by legislation, that is the category.
Interesting. Do you think SB 79 will eventually
I'm hopeful.
outstrip that?
I'm hopeful that it can happen. Again, I would say the laws really started passing around. I mean, we got a couple of bills through in the 2018 to 2021 period, but I think the real momentum has been the last couple of years. Of course, that coincided with interest rates rising, and now we have the whole tariff and supply shock, and yeah.
So, slightly different question then. Which law do you think was most popular? So I'm sort of wondering, outside of the EMB world, people who are sort of hearing about this stuff for the first time on the news or whatever, what grabs them? What speaks to people such that it sort of escapes our bubble and becomes broadly popular?
I mean, outside the bubble, I'm not sure which law. I do know which ones were meaningful inside the bubble of which is I think there was an early bill, SB 35, if you were something over 50%, Scott Wiener led it, and there were so many different groups in California that opposed it, and they were this is going to be the end this is going to be the end of our community, and it was like this law that where you could just bypass like these reviews if you were over 50% affordable, and then it turned out all these like nonprofit and homeless housing developers all used it and made their process super fast, and like even people who opposed it and wrote opposed letters in the beginning.
Interesting. And so, what is the big next agenda item? Is there a next big thing, or is it all kind of bricolage, little things going forward? Is there like next session? Is there a big law that people are rallying around?
I mean, so what happens in the California legislative cycle? Bills get introduced in January, and then this period is kind of like the incubation period. Like September to December is when people could come up with their big ideas. But there's a lot of different. There's so many different pieces that we have that are moving. I don't know if I can point to a specific one.
Well, what would you pass if you were Queen of California for a day? What law would you like to see?
Oh my God. I mean, SB 79 was like what we wanted to pass for the longest time.
That was it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think that's the end thing. But I mean, personally, I would love, at this point in my life, I would love to see a lot of the housing that's being enabled right now is like effectively like 1-bedrooms and studios.
Yeah.
And I would love to see a pathway to getting more family-sized housing built. I think that's just, when you talk to developers, the 3-bedroom units are really hard for them to financially support. And so I think if there were more incentives around, like, if you build X percentage, like 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom plus units, then like you get to go right through the line, you sail right through the line. That would be very appealing to me, because I know like for people in my age group, especially parents, a lot of what we think about and talk about is like all the child-facing and family-facing institutions are all, it's what seem like fairly precarious positions. Like you have schools closing down because they don't have sufficient enrollment, and a lot of other surrounding child-facing services, like they don't have the community support that they need, or the number of children that they need to keep going. And so personally, I would love to see more family housing.
And those are the kind of problems you can solve with agglomeration, by just getting more people together, like more support for schools, more support for services, like more people in an area. It's simple. So separate from legislation, there's the sort of, one of the fascinating things about YIMBY, I think, to everyone, is that it's relatively new. In terms of like big social movements in the U.S., at least I think it's like relatively new to people. So like all the other social movements, environmentalism, civil rights, whatever, they just have long histories and a lot of associations, a lot of baggage, I guess, and a lot of sort of things people associate that when YIMBY is somewhat new, and so has a little bit more freedom of motion. Like it's not yet been defined into a little box. So I'm curious how you think the YIMBY movement is doing on just organizing and communicating. Like, is it, thus far it seems to not have been, like my worry at the beginning, for instance, is just that it's going to get subsumed into the Democratic Party, liberalism, right? Or like, or subsumed into something else. But it seems to have sort of retained its own identity, somewhat of a like autonomy. I don't quite know exactly how to describe it, but I'm just like, that seems like magic in a bottle. So how do you think about the communication challenge going forward? Like, who is the next, when you're trying to build this movement, how do you communicate in such a way that continues to bring people in, but that avoids you getting stereotyped or boxed? Or
I definitely think there's stereotypes. There's like, it's become so commonplace. Like now, there's so many times I read about like, like current San Francisco dating memes, or like someone meets someone at a party and then they just go off about urbanism, and I'm like, oh my god. But I think it's very distributed in one sense. There are like chapters all around their country, and I think post-pandemic, it has become like, it was very California centric. There were like, before the pandemic, there was a lot of California, some Boston, some Texas, some Denver, some other like, but post-pandemic, this experience unfortunately, it has kind of nationally. Like I was reading today that like the median age of a home buyer in America is now like 59, and I'm just like, I'm like, that's not sustainable. I mean, it's not sustainable for the. So in every way, because it's distributed, every kind of community brings its own flavor and character to it. And Texas Yimbys are different than California Yimbys, who are different than like Southern California Yimbys, who are different than
Montana.
Montana.
Yimbys, who
right.
I had on my pod. Montana Republican, who was very much taking the like, why should the state be able to tell me what to do with my property type of thing. But there's just like that, not partisanness, that sort of freedom from polarization, or at least like fatal polarization. There's some. That just seems like so fragile and so valuable to me. I hope someone's thinking about how to preserve that and not get.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that this whole kind of whether it's Yimbism or like, I mean, abundance also tries to frame itself as bipartisan, and so there's just like there has to be a way in this era of hyperpolarization that you can get your issue addressed and pushed forward regardless of who's in control, just from a practical perspective.
Would be nice. I mean, climate is urgent too, but that's
which is why you have to like turn it, you just call it something else, energy abundance, or you just give it a different,
You are a tech investor from the tech world, I guess. So I have a couple of questions about that. One is, there's a lot of tech people in the Bay Area, and so a lot of the YIMBY movement has been sort of like a lot of tech people involved in it. But just sort of on the surface, it doesn't seem like tech itself has a ton to offer. This seems like kind of a low tech solution.
I mean that's why it's been political. I mean, like there's so many. It's hard to like from the tech investment world's perspective. It's like, are you going to do like real estate and tech are kind of diametrically opposed. It's like you're going to have 80% margins growing what percent year over year versus like real estate, which is look at those margins and so.
And there don't seem to be like a lot of sort of like tech widgets that are coming along to solve.
No, I mean, and that's why that's
area.
why it was a political movement. I mean, because you had looked at all the different ways of it's not just a thing that you can infinitely copy. It's something that has to go through. It's a concrete. There's one undivided piece of land that.
Well, another question about the involvement of tech people. Like, this is another thing when I threw it out on Blue Sky, I was going to be talking about this. A lot of people, I'd say one of the things that's changed since 2014 is sort of the cultural valence, I guess, of the tech industry. Yeah. Like, when you were writing, it was still very easy to think that maybe Google didn't want to be evil, et cetera, et cetera. But like things have evolved now, and there's a lot more hostility toward the tech industry. And I think a lot more tech people have kind of gone off in various directions that are not great, and that you might not want associated with your movement. So I wonder, like, of that original tech, kind of the tech origins of this, do you feel like the image of tech, or do you feel like the tech people are still a positive force in all this, basically?
I mean, it's not monolithic.
Yes.
I mean, it's not monolithic. Like, a lot of the people that you probably referencing, like, they've never, like, talk a big game, but never actually give money to, like, any of the senators. So, just, like, I haven't been,
So, you don't think that the reputation of the tech industry is any sort of meaningful anchor or effect on the YIMBY movement more broadly?
I mean, like that has been people raised, like, in progressive circles, people raised concerns about it since the very beginning. But I also just think it's not a monolithic industry, and like a lot of the folks who have been, who have been known to publicly financially support the YIMBY movement. I mean, people like OpenPhil and Dustin Nuskowitz, who's one of the largest Democratic donors. I mean, if anything, it leans more towards the other side if you actually look at the,
Is there, I always feel like in urbanism discussions, one of the difficulties for people who are inclined this way toward good urbanism is that there are not a lot of examples in North America to point to say, like, this is what a healthy, walkable, multi-ethnic, multi-class, multi-generational, like a healthy urban fabric.
Mm-hmm.
There just aren't a lot of examples to point to in the U.S., which means...
You don't think Seattle is one, or Berkeley, or no?
I mean, no at all. Like, I mean, I'm such a cliche, I went to Barcelona.
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 You didn't do
I went
that.
to Barcelona, and I came home and couldn't shut up about it until my kids forbade me from mentioning the word Barcelona any further. But like, you go see like one cute plaza with like elementary school kids doing their little parade through it on the way to school, like grandmas and teens flirting, and just like people are walking around, and just like a life. They're just like urban life. And you go home to like Seattle, and like you can't find that anywhere. Even on festivals and special occasions, you can barely get that many people out into the street in a U.S. city, and that's true almost every U.S. city. I mean, we were just on vacation in southern Spain visiting my son, who's in Granada now studying, and we were in Granada, and just like every neighborhood has a plaza. They're not big special deals. They're just like people gathering, living life together outside together, and you just like there's nothing like that hardly anywhere in the U.S. So like, who do you point to? So what this means is that most people who live in the U.S. don't have a visceral sensory experience of what it means to be in a healthy urban fabric like that. So you're sort of describing it to them, and it's like abstract. You know what I mean? So you're saying, I want to take away your car and your parking and give you this thing that you don't really know what it is, have not heard of. So like, who do you point to when you talk to people about what you want? Who do you say, I want to be more like that?
I mean, well, I would say, okay, being a Bay Area resident, I mean, we don't have it at the level of
Barcelona.
No, we don't have it at that level, but like there's actually literally like a street festival like every weekend. I swear to God, like there's like a street food festival. We have great Halloween streets in Berkeley. Yeah, we have a lot. So I don't really think it's that foreign. Like I don't think it's that foreign concept to people in the Bay. I don't know what it's like to take like. I'm not out organizing in Texas somewhere, like so. I don't know what it's like. I'm not in that environment, but I don't think it's ever. I'm never explaining it in an abstract way. I think people know what it is. I think what people get scared about are things like there's like logistical things like. When does if you approve a bunch of really tall buildings, when does financing work out for them in a very pro-cyclical environment? So sometimes like you approve something, but then the financing for the building has fallen through, and then you have like a vacant building for several years. And it's stuff like that. Like I don't think anybody's not on board with like conceptually we want to get here. It's like the timing and the disruption and the construction.
Yeah, I just always remember when we visited Mexico City, my younger son, we went to one of these pedestrian avenues with, shopping alongside, and it's just crowded. And he was saying, like, is this a holiday, or like what's going on here? We're just like, no, this is just a city where people are out in the streets, like people live,
Yeah, I don't know. It might be a Seattle thing because like we just had Halloween last week, and like somebody. There are people going around with like speakers blowing fog, and like someone set up like an amazing race course that they put up and tore down for kids to run through for candy. I don't know. People were. It might we might just have more of it here because of the weather. I don't know.
Great. All right. Well, we are out of time. So yes, out of time. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thanks for listening to this. Thanks for coming in general. And give Canary some money. And subscribe to Volts.
Thanks.
Wow. Okay, that was a lot of fun. And I could, we did talk a lot about solar energy and batteries and stuff, but having the housing and the urban part of it is a crucial part from a climate perspective and just like a human flourishing. So thank you so much. I think that's actually the final act of the night. So we might get a little music to play us out. But thank you again for David, to my Cutler. And I saw some parallels there that were cool from the energy affordability conversation we started with, and it's like this momentum we've never seen before, and it's all happening now. And now what you were saying about the legislation for affordable housing, and that's coming at a pace we've never seen before. And so I think that's a great bookend. So thank you again.
Good things are happening.
Yeah.
All right.
And thanks to all of you. This is like a highlight of the year for the Canary Live schedule. I'll just vamp a little while we get our jazz band back out. And there's something special here. The density of people who show up and are fired up about clean energy and are actually experiencing the benefits of that and showing a new way possible life and future here. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to all the sponsors. Show up, tell your friends, share some stories, sign up for the newsletter. We love you, and we're all nonprofit, and it only survives because of you showing up and talking about this stuff and reading this stuff and sharing it with your friends. And let's have the Gomper Drums Live play us out, and I hope you all have the most lovely night, and see you next year. Yeah.
one's for Nicholas. Let's hear it for Canary Media, Canary Live Bay Area. Love you guys.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay.
We got the call from the Wichita lineman.
Was that 4 songs or was it still 3? It was 3.
Don't stop playing.
That's right.
Hey, thank you for hanging out, man. That was fun.
Yeah, that was really fun.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you hanging out.
So nice to play with you.
Leave your car because you're leaving. No pleasure. Major conventions coming up.
That's right. That's right. We're going to be really busy.